So, welcome to surprising ways to escalate privileges in Entra ID. To those of you that didn't know, Entra ID is the new name of Azure Active Directory. I don't know how long we will say that, but it was renamed in the last summer. So, I guess most of you knew that already. My name is Marius Solbakken Mellum. I'm a co-founder of 42 and a principal cloud engineer there. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in security. Been working in Microsoft Identity for 15 years or something. And I do some tech blogging on goodworkaround.com. So what we will talk about today is essentially misconfigurations and different patterns leading to unintentional ways that your users or someone that essentially takes over one of the user accounts in your tenant may gain access to more stuff than they really should. So we will not be, or I actually have a separate slide on what we will not be talking about, but we're also going to do quite a lot of talk about what to avoid as a developer to either have configurations in your customer tenants, if you have that, or in your own tenant. That will lead to these kind of privilege escalation issues. So what we will not talk about is things like phishing and brute force attacks and abusing the different SSO features and social engineering, etc., etc. Those kind of more hacking topics. We will essentially always hear, I have a lot of demos, but we will essentially just use built-in functionality and things that is intentional by Microsoft, but when combined can cause issues. So what is an attack path? Because that is sort of crucial in what we're going to talk about. So if we, as a hacker of some sort, get access to a user account, and that can be through capturing a temporary session that you have for 10 minutes and need to find a way to plant a backdoor or something like that, but you have access to a user, then if you could, for example, find out that this user is a owner of an app registration or an app in Entra, then you have some more accesses, because the owner role is way more privileged than at least many people that I've talked to thought before I talked to them. If that app registration is also linked to an enterprise app with some privileged roles, the hacker can essentially add a secret. He can become that app, and with this listed scope here, this privileged role read-write directory, he can assign himself global admin. That's not good. Of course, sometimes there are way more advanced attack paths. So he might have access to a device, could also be temporarily through some kind of phishing or some kind of way that he can run stuff as a user. And he can use the same way as an owner. Then he finds another access, organization read-write all. So that access has the ability to add a trusted root certificate to your tenant. And if, as you can see, there's two arrows from the attacker, certificate-based authentication is actually enabled in your tenant, he can essentially impersonate that user or some other user that has access to something else. So there's many ways to climb in privileges, and we're talking a lot about Entra ID roles here, for example, global admin. But there are many other things as well. But the focus here will be on gaining global admin. But just think that, but this can also be access to your more like business data or content in a 365 group, team, etc. So in Entra ID, we have 105 different roles. So now we're going to go through each and every one of them. No, we're not going to do that, but there are there are 3 of these that are sort of the most critical ones. Everyone's heard of global administrator, but you also have this privileged role administrator and privileged authentication administrator that are essentially the same thing. They don't have the global administrator permissions, but they can just reset a password of a global admin or assign themselves global admin, and they should be treated the same exact way. And then you have roles like user administrator. So the user admin can create users and update and delete them, reset passwords. He cannot do that for example, a global admin. So there are some protection in place, meaning that if I have global administrator and I give one of you guys user administrator, you cannot reset my password. That's a good thing. For those who didn't know, a user administrator can also manage groups. And by managing groups, he can add himself to groups and get access to a lot of stuff. So we're going to talk a bit about how we can limit our administrators inside our tenant, for example, through something called administrative units. And we have authentication administrator, also a scary role, can reset the MFA details and create temporary access passes, which is essentially a one-time password that the user will never see, but I will be able to sign in as other users. And groups administrator, an application administrator, and a lot more. And all of these are very interesting targets for an attacker. Who uses privileged identity management? Yeah, about half, I would say. That's good. Who doesn't know what it is? Yeah. So the point of so the point of PIM, privileged identity management, is for you to be able to say that a certain user can activate their permissions. So they have the permissions or the ability to activate at will, but you can set some policies. You can say, well, in order to activate global administrator in our tenant, one of the other people that can activate global admin must approve, which is many people think that is a bit of a hassle, but it helps greatly. So through this way of pimming things, we have a few interesting things that I will show you. So protected roles. Let's find which user we're going to have. We're going to do a user admin. So it's a bit small. Let's do something like this. So we have a user, and I've gone into PIM, my roles, and this user has no eligible assignments, meaning that there's nothing that the user can go and activate at this time. But instead, we have an active assignment of user administrator. So let's see what we can do with this account. So I have a few users in my tenant called target. So we're going to start on number 1. Let's have a look at this user. So he has an active assignment of global administrator. So on the user, directly assigned, active all the time, super nice to get the hold of one of these accounts. So as a user admin, let's try to click reset password. No, I cannot do that, luckily. Okay, so let's try target number 2, because there's many ways of assigning these roles in Entra ID. So as you can see here, he has no active assignments. So right now, this account is sort of useless until he activates the role. But still, if we go and try and reset the password, it doesn't work. So the protection also goes through these eligible assignments. So that's also good. Let's try number 3. So this person has an eligible assignment, but through a group. So meaning that we actually now have a group membership. So you have something called role assignable groups in Entra. And this person is a member of that group and can activate the role. Let's try to reset the password. Also doesn't work. Great. Have anyone heard of PIM for groups? Yeah, 10% or something. So in Entra, you have, or in Entra ID, you have the option of enabling groups for, or essentially making your group membership also an eligible assignment. So that means that you can, for example, become a member of this design group or activate that group membership for 2 hours and do something, sign into an application that does something with this group or something like that. This can be combined with these privileged role-assigned groups. So I have 2 groups here, priv vendor 1 and priv vendor 2. So if we look at this, this group, if we go to assignments, it's eligible to become a global administrator. And if we look at members, we see target 3 is a member. So that was our first group that we talked about. Now let's look at this vendor 2, which is the one that was many numbers here now, but is target 4, our last global admin that we want to try to breach. If we go to privileged identity management on this vendor 2 group, it has no active assignments, but yeah, I don't have access to that as this user. Let's skip over to the admin. Let's say this one. Same group, just as a global admin to read it. So instead, this target 4 has an eligible assignment to become member of the group. Awesome, because now we can actually take, let's say, a couple of roles, 4 assigned roles for that group, and for example, assign a global admin, or a set of roles. Let's say I want to have my support staff being able to essentially just activate this group membership and become user admin, help desk admin, something else admin, exchange admin at the same time. Activate once, because people are not so happy about activating 5 roles every morning, for example. But the thing is that this is not a good idea. It's actually a very bad idea. It's very user-friendly, but still a bad idea. Because what will happen now is that when I switch back to my user admin, and let's find this target 4, he is an eligible member of the group. Let's go to users. And if we try to reset the password here, that works fine. So there's no protection for those eligible group memberships that again give you some role. So that's worth noting, and meaning that if you, for example, you have a vendor that you want to assign a lot of roles, don't do it this way. What you can do, which is at least better, is that you first activate the group membership, and then the group is assigned eligible roles, so you need to sort of do a 2-step thing, but then it doesn't make sense to do it with a group anyway. So, yeah. Why am I opening my email? Let's do it like this. back here. So in summary, user admin cannot reset passwords for these protected roles, except through this last method of eligible member of. Who here has heard of administrative units? Yeah, quite a few. It's like 30%. Who here uses administrative units? 0. That's what I thought. So essentially, a administrative unit is a way to divide your tenant into essentially not separate tenants. They can see each other and everything, but there's new ways of delegating access. So you can, for example, say that all of my users in HR belong to an administrative unit that I call HR. And essentially, then I can say that some HR person can get user admin or help desk admin on that administrative unit. So I can say that these 10 users you can reset the password for, but not all of the others. And we have we have a newer type, which is still in preview, called restricted management administrative unit, which is a great new option here. And it essentially is a way for you to say that everything that belongs to this administrative unit, you need to be explicitly delegated permissions on that administrative unit in order to modify the objects. Not even global admins can go through that. They can assign and deassign or unassign groups from the restricted management administrative unit, but there's a few new things. And why is this important? Well, the thing is that when you start when you need access to something in a tenant, you should always try to focus on least privilege, and both from a pure like IT security point of view, but from your own point of view, you cannot be blamed for something that you didn't have access to do. That's always nice. So let's create some administrative units in our tenant. Let's take this account which is a global admin. So under Entra ID, we have administrative units. So I already created 2. I have an example, this was very small again, example regular AU, which is not of the type restricted management. And I have one called example restricted management AU. Pretty easy to understand what they do. So if we go into this restricted management one, which I believe is sort of the most useful type, then you see here users, groups, devices, and roles and administrators. Okay, so it's sort of a subtenant. So here I can actually add member. So I can go in and take any user, for example, this person, and add it to this restricted management group. And I can, it will still be sort of on the tenant level as well. And I can also add groups, existing groups. So let's take this SG executive. That sounds important. So I'm signed in as a global admin. And with replication in Entra ID, this takes a little while sometimes. You've probably never seen that if you work actively in Entra ID. It's coming. So now we are assigning this group to this restricted management AU. And the point is that what you need to do now is, in order to modify this user and this group, you must actually have a role assigned on the administrative unit. So, for example, here I can see groups administrator. There's 0 people assigned. And if I'm not assigned groups administrator here, I will not be able to modify the groups linked. So let's go into this SG executive now. And as you can see, I'm a global admin. Doesn't work. I don't have a delete option. I cannot go in and remove members. So as a global, so this is not a tool to avoid your, or to deny your global admin access to stuff. Because as a global admin, I can go in and click remove, meaning that I just remove the protection. But it's very useful to be able to delegate, for example, user administrator on tenant level, while still not allowing them to add themselves to certain groups in your tenant that is, well, has some content that you don't want shared with anyone. But now, how about applications? So we talked about this protection and everything. So we have a lot of permissions assigned to our users. But I think people are sort of good at maintaining user accounts and handling credentials and conditional access and all of that, sort of. But apps is a whole other story. Who knows how the difference between app registrations and enterprise apps? Yeah, 40%. It's nice. So essentially, a enterprise application is an instance of an app registration. That is sort of the purely easiest way to explain it. So in my app registration, I define my redirect URIs, I define my credentials, I define my different more like technical things. And the enterprise application, which is the instance, is what I actually, for example, assign permissions. A service principal is, and an enterprise application equals, sort of. There's a few things, but it's the same. And on app registrations, we have 3 types of credentials. We have secrets and certificates, and we have federated credentials. So secrets is when you sign in with something called, or all of these are when you sign in with something called client credential grant in OpenID Connect, where essentially you provide one of these as a proof that you have access as this application. Secret is the same as a password essentially, but you can have multiple secrets, which is which we'll use later. Certificates is just a essentially more secure way to do the same thing, and federated is completely different in that it doesn't store anything anywhere. It's just I'm allowed to authenticate as this app from GitHub Actions running from a certain branch in a certain repository in GitHub, for example. Very useful, where you don't need to handle, for example, rollover of a secret and similar. Then we have managed service identities. So if you use Azure and create different kinds of Azure resources, you have probably created a managed service identity, I would assume. And the point of managed service identities is that I can, for example, have a logic app in Azure, or a Azure function, or whatever. Many different resources in Azure support these. And it essentially eliminates for you this app registration part. So Microsoft handles the app registration part, essentially. Rolls over a certificate, does these things for you, and you just consume the service principal, essentially. And I'm going to show how we can utilize that later in a attack path. So to handle these app registrations, you have the different roles, of course. You have a global admin, which can do anything. You have application admin that can do anything with apps. And you have an application owner. So on both of these objects, both the enterprise app and the app registration, you can be an owner. So, and that is nice, because then I can say that, well, this is my app doing something. This person bought it, so I'm going to set him as an owner of that app. and then I sort of have a poor man's governance solution over my applications, because these are tagged with owners. Bad idea. Don't do that. Because the thing is that an application owner actually has permissions. And most of all, he has permissions to add credentials to these apps. And that was what we did in this earlier attack path, where we essentially had a unprivileged user, but he had access as owner on a single app registration. So we were able to add a credential. And who here monitors credentials on app registrations? And there's 3 of you. Awesome. And that is very consistent with what I see at customers as well. They create them, and they forget about them until they stop working because their secret expired, and then they create a new secret. So a better way of doing this owner thing is an app scoped directory role. So on apps, rather than on sort of the tenant scope, same as with administrative unit, you also have roles. However, there are currently no protection mechanisms for most of what we do here. So if you use app scope directory roles, you actually do have some of these protection mechanisms that we talked about, but the owner role and depending on there's no dependence on how much this enterprise application has access to. So in Microsoft Graph, you have a gazillion different scopes that you can assign, or you can essentially request them, and then an admin consents that yes, you can access this, and that can be user read write all or other kinds of permissions. And none of these do any, or there is no, so you have this permission, let me make this more secure by requiring global admin or something. As soon as you have consented that this enterprise app has a certain access, then it has that access. You can definitely remove it, but any owner or anything is not affected. So let's have a look at that protection as well. Let's go in as our app owner. So here I am, Alan, and let's go into Entra ID and our roles, just to see, we can go to PIM and my roles. And we can see that there are no active assignments of roles. This user doesn't have any permissions. Cool. So going to app registrations, I have one app. It's called high privileged app. Should set off some alarm bells. But this is owned by me. And that means that I can go into this application and do stuff. I can delete it. I can update properties. But under certificates and secrets, I can also go to new client secret, click add, and I get a new client secret. Okay, that's great. But the problem is that when we now also look at API permissions, so we have actually granted this app quite a lot of permissions. So for example, this one, role management, read-write directory, that can assign global admin. So that means that this user, just by being himself, can add a permission, add a credential to an app that has access to grant himself global admin. That's not good. And there is no protection saying that, well, but this app has this role management directory or read-write directory, so it should have required some additional permissions, perhaps. But no, owner can still add these secrets. And this app has actually not only this scope, but if we go to PIM, Entra roles, and find global administrator, and under active assignments, I actually assigned this service principal the global admin role as well, just to sort of really demonstrate that, no, there is no protection of it. So make sure that you both monitor the credentials and don't use the owner in that way as sort of a governance thing, because owner has permissions. That is sort of the takeaway from that. Yeah. So one more thing. We're adding a secret to an app registration. Who knew that you can also add secrets to service principals? Yeah, a few? 5 of you or something? So let's say that you you don't want owner on app registration, so we remove that, but we want this user to be able to assign the application or assign new hires to an app or something like that. So we instead give him owner on enterprise application level, not on app registration level. So let's have a look at that as well. This is a bit more sort of tricky to demo, but we can try it anyway. Let's find the correct person, this app owner. So this Alan guy, I used the same app, but he has, let's go to app registrations and owned apps and go to the instance of that app. This one. So here we are on the enterprise application instead of the app registration, and we have assigned role there as well. So that's 2 different owners, essentially. And what I can do now is that in the portal here, I don't have any way of doing this. But we have this F12 button. So let's have a look at what happens behind the scenes here. Okay, so we have some stuff. Let's just grab our authorization header like this. Okay, cool. So let's open PowerShell and essentially do something like that. Access token, read a string. Okay, so now we have our access token. We can do connect MG graph using the graph module and just provide the access token. Fun. So yeah, I added the bearer in front, didn't I? Like this. There we go. So now we're connected to the Microsoft Graph, and by looking at invoke MG, I think we can do something. No, not that one. MG graph request, URI, HTTPS. We're going to access the Microsoft Graph. We are going to access service principals / this one. So we find it. And if we type add password and do a post, we've added a credential to the service principal level. And this can be used as the same I can use this to authenticate as the service principal. And that means that I can essentially hide as an attacker just by getting this access token temporarily. Because there's no way of going back to the app registration level and finding this secret. There's still only these 4 secrets. So this new secret was PJT. That's not here. So that means that I can, as an owner on the enterprise app, I can authenticate as that service principal. And most people doesn't know about this at all, and they definitely don't monitor these kinds of credentials. So that's also something to be aware of, that it exists. And this also works for multi-tenant applications. So if I am a service provider and I have some permissions into a customer tenant, then someone can add additional credentials. They are scoped to that tenant, though. So, because in a multi-tenant application world, the app registration is in the service provider's tenant, while the enterprise or the instance or instances, because you can have multiple instances at different customers, these credentials can be added, and meaning that it will look like you are doing stuff with your sort of multi-tenant app into the customer environment, even though the secret is actually in the customer environment. So it will say in the log that which key is actually used. So if they add a client secret, and you will see in the sign-in logs that was the secret used. But yeah, there are ways to avoid it. And that's this one. And this is the only place where Microsoft refers to an enterprise app as an app instance, I think. But through this app instance property lock, you can actually say that, no, we don't need any credentials on service principals, or on the service principals belonging to this one, or this app registration. So if you don't need credentials on enterprise apps and service principals, use this. And yeah. So we talked already about Microsoft Graph scopes. And there are many. It's sort of a similar list of scopes here as well, where they're sort of the same thing as, or they relate to different Entra ID roles. Meaning that, for example, this role management read-write directory, it's not the same as global admin, but it can assign it. So it's more of a privileged role administrator just for enterprise apps, essentially. Application read-write all is essentially application administrator just for these kinds of scopes instead. And both of these are very nice to avoid if you can. So, for example, application read-write all can add credentials to any app in the tenant. And of course, then you can hear that, well, if they have another app, so I need application read-write all because I'm terraforming all the app registrations in a tenant. Yeah, nice. Do that, but make sure that you secure or securely handle your app registration and credentials, because if you temporarily has access to application read-write all, then they have access to all apps. You know, user read-write all, that actually cannot modify global admins, but it can update users to match dynamic group criteria, for example. That is sort of a common attack vector where if you can modify users, or perhaps your own user, to suddenly start matching different dynamic groups, and then being added to teams and accessing data and everything. But these cannot update user passwords, which is a good thing. There's actually no way of resetting user passwords as an app, so it is a bit of a hassle. Then we have some scopes that comes with surprises. So we have organization read-write all. It's something you really should avoid using if you really avoid using it. So the description says that it's allow the app to read and write organizational and related resources. So organization is like on the tenant level with the name and everything. And something to do with subscribed SKUs and tenant branding. Awesome. So we want to deploy tenant branding from our infrastructure as code repository. That's what we want. The problem is that permission also gives you the ability to add a trusted root certificate to Entra, and if certificate-based authentication is enabled, you can impersonate any user in the tenant. So comes with a few surprises that can be worth noting. I have a few of these. So app role assignment read write all. Does anyone know why you shouldn't allow most applications to have this permission? Not everyone at once. So yeah, it's a useful scope that lets my service principal assign app roles. I can essentially implement my own identity governance solution. Awesome. But it also gives you the ability to grant any application, any Microsoft Graph permission. This is properly documented by Microsoft, but it's sort of by just the name, app role assignment, you're assigning app roles. The problem is that the Microsoft Graph is an app, and app roles is the way you assign, or when you do an admin consent, that's essentially adding an app role. So it gives you a lot of permissions. That means you can just have, by one graph query, you can add the same app can add itself to role management read-write directory, meaning it can assign global admin. Group read-write all, useful permission for automating creation of Entra ID groups, but it also gives you access to all the contents of all Teams and Microsoft 365 groups. So there are better scopes than this, and really checking, because the thing is that all of these are called group read write all, but there's also one called group.create, and there's one called group member read write all. So they're quite easy to discover when you know what kind of object you want to modify, essentially. So what are we supposed to do then? Well, first of all, utilize the least privileged scopes. So as I said, group.create, application read-write owned by, rather than application read-write all. So there are scopes available. But I would really like from Microsoft to start adding more of these group read-write dot assigned or group read-write owned by, and all of these for many more objects. Because right now it's a hassle to really get least privilege. You should really monitor application credentials, both on app registrations and on service principal level. And as an Entra ID admin, question whether permissions are really needed. So I see so many applications that request way more than they need, way more. And regularly review the granted permissions. So maybe the app has changed, or the usage of some kind of application has changed, and they no longer need something. So let's skip over to managed service identities, because this opens a whole new can of worms. So service principal linked to an Azure resource with no credentials to handle. Awesome. So I can have a logic app that can authenticate without me handling any secret at all. And this is where you sort of transition from things being assigned in Entra and used in sort of improper fashion, and that is the attack vector. But now it's suddenly Azure RBAC instead. So that means that does everyone know how Microsoft has sort of subscriptions and management groups and resource groups and everything? It's just, yeah, think of it as folders, and they have parents and they get permissions through that. So that means that we have new attack paths. So for example, we can have a user that is granted contributor on a management group that contains a subscription, that contains a logic app. That means that this user has contributor access to the logic app. And the logic app has a managed identity linked to it, which is, and I always just assign global admin, but it could be anything, right? It could be any permission. It could also be just user read write all or something, because you are utilizing a tiny logic app to do some kind of automation. And then through this contributor role, this user can actually modify the logic app to do something as we've seen in other talks here, where if you send certain headers, then you branch out to a new code that only that attacker knows about, for example. But it also opens the more of a infrastructure as code or more deployment side of things attack, where perhaps you have a user that has access to code and can do deployment into the logic app or some other service. Then that also becomes a new attack vector. So let's just do a quick demo of Azure Contributor to Entra ID permissions, which is very simple. If I can remember which tenant I did it in, because I have a lot of them. I think I have this one. So in this tenant, I have a logic app that I call breakglass. And logic app is just the sort of simplest way to demo this. So this breakglass has an identity. So that means that I have just clicked on and save. And that's everything that I do in order to enable in this system-assigned managed identity. So now this logic app can authenticate as this principal, and I have also added some permissions to that. So you can have a look at that as well, because this will now just in Entra, if we go to Enterprise Applications, what did I call it? Breakglass. And I say, this one, like this. So I just search for breakglass under Enterprise Apps, and I will find that this is a managed identity. You will have seen that on right here, managed by Microsoft, when it comes to a certificate expiry status, for example. So Microsoft fixes everything for us, and we have no app registration at all. But I have granted it some permissions, like policy read write conditional access, user read all and policy read all. So not a lot. It's just sort of to have something to demo here. But then with my contributor access, I can simply edit this in a nice GUI. So I can just add a parallel branch, for example. So I don't want to affect the code here at all. I just want to add some code. I see that we are starting to get short on time, so I'm not going to do everything here. But I can add a HTTP call that already has all the authentication present. So here I can just type, for example, graph microsoft.com/v1 users. I can add authentication, saying that just use the managed identity and click save. Of course, this will be, or at least can be, visible to anyone, but then you have a nice feature in Logic Apps, so you can just go back to the previous version and just promote that to the current version, so it goes back to being the active code. So by doing this promote and clicking save, now if I made some changes, all my changes will be gone. There are definitely traces here, but I might already have more permissions to your tenant than you want me to have. So yeah, when using different privileged roles in these managed identities, make sure that you properly handle permissions in Azure. Let's do some key takeaways. First of all, do not combine PIM for groups with role assignable groups. As we showed, where there's no protection of users, make sure that you enable property lock on your app registrations so that you cannot add additional credentials. You should monitor app credentials both on app registration level and service principal level. You should audit Microsoft Graph application consents. So when there's new applications granted access, yeah, audit them. But this can also be true for your custom-built APIs or whatever. So most definitely. But it's a bit simpler to show how to elevate permissions in Entra ID. But same thing for all of your custom apps and APIs. Application owner can add credentials, so don't use it as sort of a poor man's governance solution. Yeah, least privilege as always. It's not always that is possible, to be honest. So if you have some needs that cannot be met by the current graph scopes, then you might need this user read write all or group read write all. So, but then you can secure things a bit more with this administrative units. Yeah. So, and everyone of course knows all the 400 plus Azure RBAC roles by heart. So yeah, make sure that you at least put some effort into least privilege here. And well, yeah, something.read write all may give you more permissions than you really asked for. And yeah, so definitely use managed service identities. They're not scary at all. They are one of the best things in Azure, I would say. But watch out for RBAC-based attack paths. Yeah. Thank you.